Hello and welcome to the Grow Places podcast, where we explore the virtuous circle of people, growth and place. Brought to you by Grow Places and hosted by our founder, Tom Larson. Today we have a special episode recorded on site at the Truman Brewery in East London, where we are excited to work in partnership with the Truman Brewery and local people in Brick Lane, Spitalfields and Bangortown.
Okay, so here we are at the Truman Brewery standing in Ellen Gardens, and we're here with the team from Morris & Co. Guys, introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about how you are influencing this site.
Hi, I'm Edmund from Morris & Company. I'm a senior associate at the company. I'm here
Hi, I'm Jonathan Chan, Morris & Company. I'm an associate at Morris & Company.
Fantastic.
And yeah, we're here at the Truman Brewery site. We're working on a master plan to redevelop the site behind us. The master plan's led by Buckley Gray Yeoman, and Morris & Company have one building on this master plan site, which is Block 3, which is on this corner here.
And what does that building do, or how are people going to use that in the future once it's built?
Sure, so this building does a lot of things. On the ground floor there's a cinema, an event space, there are shops, there are cafes and restaurants, it's community art spaces. So it's doing a lot on the ground floor, and on the upper floors it's creative workspaces.
Wow, fantastic. Is that part of the affordable workspaces, Tom?
Yeah, there'll be an element of affordable workspace within this building and across the site as a whole. And what Truman have got a really long history of doing, and what they intend to continue to do, is to support businesses that are small, medium, large, and support them on their journey to try and retain businesses on site. A large number of the businesses here have been here for 5+, sometimes even 10+ years, and that really strengthens a sense of community on site. So yes, as well as the sort of strict boundaries of affordable workspace within planning, there'll also just be a kind of general attitude to supporting and nurturing those businesses. And yeah, definitely on this site. This is one of the larger buildings within the master plan in terms of the amount of floor space in one building. But that can be divided and part of the overall ecosystem here at Truman.
What's interesting about this building is it reads as two buildings, but really it's one that's connected through a series of bridge links.
Nice.
And that's to drive through the connection to Ellen Gardens through to the new yards that have been developed within the master plan. And that connection's really important. On either end of the building you've got a connection through, and it also allows the building to split up in more ways than you otherwise might manage. And the small building becomes this really beautiful kind of clean floor plate that's really easily divisible in different manners.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We've never done this before at Morris & Company, which is it's essentially two buildings. There's one core in one of the buildings and then bridge links linking to the smaller building. So that smaller building is going to be incredible. It's going to have basically a sort of quadruple aspect space in this building. Yeah. It's going to be really.
So that's on this corner, isn't it?
Yeah,
this,
that's right.
Yeah.
This smaller building.
And now, it's not just one building on this master plan. Is there something else you might be doing for the Truman Brewery?
We do have two other sites that we're doing for the Truman Brewery. One is the Ellie's Yard project, and the other one is what's called Block A, which people will probably be less familiar with. It's currently a building that's not in use, and we're looking to reinvigorate that site and place a new building there.
That's a Space Invader building, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you design a data building?
That's actually been one of our biggest challenges to date. We've never, as a company, we're not like a data center designer, but we've brought all of our intelligence and learning from other projects to try and work out how can you really animate something that's technically not animated. You know, it doesn't require windows. It's an empty box with blank windows, and we've looked at different ways we can generate interest on the site. As Jonathan mentioned, it's got lots of graffiti on it at present. So we're looking to reuse some of that if we can, but also create a building that at its lower levels can really embrace the fact that there's a street art culture in the area and really allow that to happen, and the client's really on board with kind of that becoming a canvas to the street. And we think that's quite exciting. Over the years that might change and develop.
Well, otherwise it would look completely out of place, right? Because everything's so colourful around here.
Yeah, and you can see that here in Ellen Gardens. And we'll obviously, when we get over there onto the other side of the site, we can have a look specifically at that element in terms of the data centre. But it's worth mentioning that Truman already have a permission for a data centre on this site here. So running along the southern side of Buxton Street on the south side here of Allen Gardens, and you can see at the moment it's a blank wall, which is some of the old brewery buildings. And obviously when the site was a brewery, it was very inward looking, and the data centre permission didn't do anything to improve that. If anything, it made it worse, because it was not a historic sort of inward looking aspect. It was a new building that was blank along the ground floor. So by moving that data centre use somewhere else on the estate, because we'll talk about it a bit later, but they are, you know, we all need data in our lives, particularly more and more now, but maybe this is much better as something that's open, and that was really the brief for the guys, was to think about how do we create a really sort of active front onto Allen Gardens, and all the benefits that come with that.
So what happens to this facade then? Does that remain, or do you guys knock that down?
It's going to be knocked down actually,
Okay.
but we've done an audit of the materials that are being demolished, and we're going to try and reuse some of the bricks and try reuse some of the materials that are being taken down. But we'll probably go in there over to Buxton Street shortly, but you'll see that there's no pavement at all on the southern side of Buxton Street. So right now you just have sort of cars that sort of whiz by, no pavement space. So from a pedestrian point of view, it's not great. And so with the block 3 design, what we're doing is we're removing this wall, we're creating a much more generous pavement, and we're having sort of restaurants and cafes that look out onto Allen Gardens. So there'll be a lot more street activity, a lot more of a sort of activated frontage.
The building is deliberately and quite generously set back from the red line boundary, so it's, instead of being hard up against it, there's been a move to move it away, and it steps as you move across the street, along the street, it steps back to become more generous and set back from the chimney, which is obviously like a great monument of the site.
Fantastic. So really activating the street frontage, is that the right wording?
Yeah, that's architect speak for
fantastic,
it'll be
for
a nice
making the
place.
street great to sit and eat.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then, you know, so you're going to remove this, and will it be the office or the commercial space right there, or will you be
above the ground?
Yeah.
And in some instances we have a mezzanine layer as well. So in the main building we've got 2 layers, so that we can fit in what's proposed to be a cinema with big cinema screens, and be a really like engaging space if you want to come, with a bar on one of the new corners facing the new square, which is in a square that should host different activities as well, so it'd be a really vibrant and interesting space. And then above that, what you'll see is office floor plates, but the office floor plates themselves they're animated and interesting. There's terraces on various levels, setbacks to reduce the impact of the mass as we move up the building. And in some key corners of the building we've got some little areas of interest for artwork and so on.
fantastic? And is that going to be one of the highest buildings on the site at all?
Yeah, I think it's one of the highest that's proposed at the moment.
Yeah, exactly that. So yes, it is one of the larger buildings, and I think that's a really important aspect of this development site. Really, you know, we're so close to Liverpool Street. We're in the highest PTAL, which is the accessibility score that every area of London gets, because it's close to Liverpool Street, as I say, but also Shoreditch High Street Station, bus links, pedestrian links and cycle links. So densifying the site is a really key part of that brief. And the buildings that we're proposing are equivalent height to the taller buildings in the conservation area, which are the brewery buildings themselves. And you know, that aspect of the park is something that, as Edmund was saying, particularly there about this kind of layering that we're looking to do to kind of introduce an element of distance between the park and the building, but while still building responsibly with the land.
And what kind of materials are we talking? I mean, sort of, what's it going to look like on the outside?
So it's going to be a brick building, a brick and concrete building, really. As part of our process, we look a lot at the context and what the buildings are made out of in the sort of historical context. And we're finding that brick is a predominant material, so it seems pretty obvious to make it a brick building if we want it to be sort of contextual. But what we've done is we've been studying quite hard at the sort of the tones of the existing brickwork. So looking at the existing brickwork in the boiler house, in Block H, of the Truman Brewery, and collating this kind of collection of tones and colours, and therefore sort of choosing new tones that will complement those existing ones.
So picking up those colours and running them through. And just for context for people who don't work on it, Block H is the existing historic frontage onto...
It's Block H is the long one over there on the
cream coloured.
Why don't we take a walk and we'll
Yeah,
have
great.
a look?
Sure,
That's
sure.
the best way to see it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Excellent.
it's a very forensic exercise. We try not to just point at a yellow brick and point at a red brick. It goes much more deep than that, and we try and develop the whole, we call it taxonomy of the area, which is just a way of categorizing different elements, what the windows are like, what the proportions are like, what the materials are doing. Is the area predominantly brick or concrete or precast? What's the overriding, rhythm of the area? Is it big buildings, small buildings?
That's right.
And that you keep going, and eventually you start to, and from walking around the area, you get an understanding of what might actually work, depending on what kind of building you're wanting to develop and deliver. And in this case, as Jonathan says, we've looked at something that feels quite of the area and respects the history and tradition of the area through the use and kind of treatment of the materiality.
Yeah.
And how are you predicting, a big part of our sort of what we need to do of the brief is to project sort of long into the future that, what you're designing is going to be fit for purpose in 20, 30, maybe even 400 years. We were joking that 400 years might be the brief, but, how are you designing for the future, as it were?
Well, I think when you're designing workplace buildings, it's important to think about that question about future adaptability. And so what this really is a sort of modern version of the Victorian warehouse. So it's a building that's designed, but it's not overly designed. It allows things to happen. We're thinking about floor to ceiling heights, thinking about how the building is constructed structurally, so that the building can in future be adapted. Floor plates being taken out in future or put back in. So we're looking at a building that's going to be precast concrete structure with beams and slabs that can be removed, timber slabs that can be removed. And this sort of sense of adaptability is really important when designing a new building.
Yeah, we've the client's been quite keen to push the idea of longevity and adaptability, and we have undertaken studies where we've looked at, well, what if one day this was to become a residential building and so on, and studies like that. And again, as I think we talked about earlier, how might the building divide up in different ways? So with a commercial building, you don't know necessarily at this stage if it's going to be one large tenant that comes in and takes the floors, or is it going to actually serve lots of little businesses and smaller businesses, which might be more appropriate for this area. So we've made sure the building's very flexible and can accommodate all those different types of uses.
And what about the sustainability credentials? I mean, that's obviously going to have to be a huge factor as well. How is this being designed that, it can serve everyone as well as the planet?
It's been a very, very thorough process, and we've worked really closely with Arup engineers to really push the boundaries of to go beyond kind of what's considered best practice and really look at future-proofing it. So, the buildings are fully naturally ventilated, the floor plates have been optimised, the structure, as Jonathan said, is very efficient. It uses timber and precast, it can be demountable. What else have we done?
Yeah, so when you're talking about sort of the building's impact on the planet, you're talking about carbon, essentially. And there's embodied carbon, which is all the carbon that goes into the materials in the construction, and then there's operational carbon, which is sort of the energy expended during the building's use. So in terms of embodied carbon, we've been really lean with the materials. As Ed says, the structure's been optimized. The beams are only as thick as they need to be. And we're using as much timber as we can, sort of regenerative materials. And then in terms of the operational carbon, as Ed says, it's a naturally ventilated building. So with our engineers, Arup, we've worked hard to design the the building's shape to enable natural ventilation to happen. And this is something that, you know, they've pushed us on, and that's been a really great sort of collaborative process where we've been designing this building from what they call first principles, which is getting the shape right, which enables air to flow through. Yeah, that's been great.
Yeah, traditionally you might develop a large floor plate office building, and the developer might just assume that you ventilate it mechanically, and that has been the sort of school of thought for quite a long time. But moving beyond that, you have to think about the depth of the building. Can you get ventilation naturally into the middle of the building? And that's something we're doing here, which is really interesting, and it's kind of pushed us to think about the building slightly differently. The core gets larger, so the efficiency is slightly lower than you might normally have in a commercial building of this nature, but the client's been really keen to actually embrace that to future-proof this building.
So we're promoting natural daylight over electronic light, for example, potentially, and fresh air over air conditioning, which, as we know, can contribute to the CO2s.
And that's you know, we've come inside the site now. We were just on the other side of this wall in the park, but we're only 100 metres from Brick Lane, and as I said, probably 10 minutes walk from Liverpool Street, and it's dead quiet here. The air quality is amazing. You know, as I said, it's very quiet, it's very relaxing, and that allows us to promote some of these ideas about just open the windows, you know, control the temperature that way, and then that actually having a positive impact on the public realm that we're proposing as well, so that you kind of don't feel like you have these kind of corporate sealed boxes. It's much more about the people living, working, enjoying the space, kind of being integrated and having that connection between the buildings, but also between the ground, what's happening at ground and what's happening above. And you can see that in the way that the building approaches the yards, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the smaller of the two buildings, the building that's over there, the entire south face of that building is being given over to external terraces. So that not only does that work really well operationally because it protects the building from too much direct sunlight, but it also provides people using the building with fantastic outdoor space to use and to go out and just take a breath of fresh air and take a break from looking at their screen.
Absolutely. And so the tall part, if I may, is going to be over here or over there?
The tallest part of Block 3 is going to be pretty much where I'm standing. So essentially the tallest part of the building is about here. The heights of the building step down to the eastern side, and they also step down towards the chimney as well. And the shape of the building, the massing, is set back away from the chimney to enable the chimney to sort of breathe on the skyline.
Great. And how will the building sort of meet the public realm and the urban sort of these spaces here that, you know, for the viewers at home, I guess the bits that anyone can go into and sit and enjoy? Maybe they're basking in the sun, or maybe they're having a coffee. You know, what kind of impact is that going to create for the space in here?
Let's walk and talk, because then you can.
Yeah, sure.
We can try and map it out where we are. So we're still under the building here.
Inside the building.
So we're inside the building.
We're in the cinema.
This
at the
is
moment.
incredible.
We're in the
It's
cinema,
really lightweight, guys. You've done
Screen 2.
amazing work.
Very inside outside.
Yeah, we're in the cinema right now. We've just watched the latest Marvel Spider-Man
Have
27.
we? Interesting. Spider-Man 7.
Yeah, that's right. So now we're moving out onto Chimney Yard.
Okay.
So Chimney Yard is going to be roughly here.
Yeah.
Chimney Yard. There are two sort of major yards in the new master plan.
Okay.
Chimney Yard over here, and Cooperage Yard over there. So shortly we'll have a look at the Cooperage building, which is beautiful. Chimney Yard is more the events yard. It's sort of more formal in character. It's going to have the cinema entrance like fronting onto this yard. So it's going to have lots of sort of activity around the yard, but also the yard itself is going to be really well utilised. There's going to be lots of seating. There's sort of going to be awnings. There's going to be lots of planting as well. So we've been working really hard with Space Hub, the landscape architects, to really green up these spaces. So that, you know, when you're in these spaces, you know, not only is there a lot of greenery to look at, but it's also greenery for shading as well, and for air quality.
Yeah. and really important, I guess, as we move forward through climate change and
Yeah.
need more shade and shelter,
Yeah.
etc. Yeah.
But,
That's right.
I mean, I suppose the buildings, even though it's a commercial building, the actual entrance to that commercial building is only one structural bay wide. It's only about 7 meters wide, but the whole circumference of the building is given over as much as it can be to public uses.
Yeah.
Cinema, cafes, bars, restaurants, and all of those. We're also looking at absolutely maximising every little space we can. So wherever we've been able to push a subsidiary use of the office in, then we try and create an active space
Yeah.
for the public. And that's been a very thorough exercise. It's the whole master plan kind of working together to work out what's the best place for all of these different uses. And so often in a building you just get to design one building and you do the best you can for that site, but this has been working with different architects, different collaborators, and taking on their advice and helping the whole space work together holistically.
So designing sort of the ground floor user experience, really, it's been a lot of fun, because we're essentially what we're doing is we're designing an extension of Brick Lane, these new yards, all the new passages, the new lanes. In terms of feel, we want it to just be seamless with what already exists. So for Block 3, what we've done is we've taken a look, we've done a study of lots of different shop units on Dre Walk, on Brick Lane. We've measured everything up, we've created these little kind of cute little physical models to really understand the character and the space, the sort of the scale of these spaces. And so all of these studies, hopefully we can show you as well some of these models, but all of these studies inform the proposal for the ground floor plane, i.e. proportions of openings, heights of doors and things like that, so that architecturally it's sort of seamless as you walk from Brick Lane to here.
I love that idea of the extension of Brick Lane. I mean, the more Brick Lane we have in our lives, the better, right? It conjures up such a fantastic image in our heads, and we all understand, cool, just more of the good stuff,
Exactly.
Yeah. But in a really much more contemporary setting.
I think so.
And one that hopefully I'm sure will bring through that character as well. And we were talking to Space Hub, and they were talking about not sterilizing anything. That's the last thing we want to do, is strip anything of its character. It has to sort of speak to the existing way that people are living and working in these spaces.
Yeah. So where we are right now is you really get a sense of the change there will be, because here, we're surrounded by former industrial buildings, but over here, behind there is the gardens that were at previously. There's obviously zero connection. You wouldn't even know they were there if you came from the south.
No.
So by driving that route through the buildings, and with the building being connected with bridges above, we're going to create this really amazing and interesting route through, which would be a very unique little slice of London. And we're really keen to not just do grand spaces, but to work with different scales of spaces. Because if you walk through Brick Lane, some of the most exciting spaces are the ones where, this feels a little bit tight and interesting. Or Dre Walk, very good example of something that, in the hustle and bustle of the sunshine, there's people sitting around. And it's just this really, really rich and vivid space. And we really want to bring that to this development, not to create something that otherwise, potentially you get these grand spaces that can feel a bit sterile, there's not enough people. This is absolutely the opposite of that. And that's been pushed at every step of the way by all of the different design teams.
Absolutely. And sort of bestowing different characters on the different parts of the master plan. So I mentioned Chimney Yard back over there. Now we're standing in Cooperage Yard, which is the smaller, it's sort of more domestic in scale. It's a lot greener, actually. There's going to be a little sort of pocket park kind of next to that chimney there. It's going to be amazing. So if you sort of envisage that chimney there, behind that chimney is going to be the smaller of the Block 3 buildings. And then just to the left of it is a new thoroughfare to Allen Gardens, as Edmund said. And in this thoroughfare, you're going to have these bridges that sort of fly over your head. So this passage, what we're calling Cooperage Passage, is a really exciting space. It's quite a sort of unique space in that these passages fly overhead. They're very reminiscent of the entrance to Dre Walk. You kind of have those two bridges, one over your head as you go into Dre Walk, and then the other across Brick Lane. Right? Yeah. So that kind of feeling of things flying over your head, that's what's going to happen there. And these bridges, they're going to be inhabited by people. on the tops of these bridges, it enables sort of more external amenity space for people in the offices to sort of step out onto the bridges and be able to look, south and north towards Allen Gardens. And in terms of the architectural language of these bricks themselves, they're quite industrial in character. So from the bridges you'll be able to see the sort of overground bridge. The one the sort of
the
truss-like.
big steel.
Yeah. And the bridges themselves have this sort of truss-like kind of architectural language.
So they mimic what's existing in the area already.
Sort of riffing on.
Okay.
On the industrial.
And you mentioned that you were going to try and salvage as much of the wall, the existing brick wall, as possible, and then reuse that in the space. What other materials are you, or sort of methodologies, ways, are you designing that might help kind of reuse what we have here on the site?
Well, as I said, there's been a huge audit of all the materials in all of the buildings, basically. So we've kind of got the shopping list of steel beams, kind of metal cladding.
These gates
bricks,
these gates, where are they?
Some gates, there's a gate with a sort of, is it Salvador Dali?
Oh, the blue gate.
Yeah, the blue one.
Yeah, okay.
So the plan is to
Fantastic.
reuse that gate, and we're going to try and hang it off an existing steel beam that's going to come from Block U, I think.
Yeah, from this one here.
Yeah. So just trying to reuse as much material as possible.
I suppose it brings an element of fun and sort of serendipity into the building as well. Again, not being too strict or sterile as architects might be seen to be sometimes, of actually embracing what can we use and what happens if we throw that against our building or between two buildings, and how does this all start to come together, and perhaps actually create something richer than if we were just to design something completely new and standalone. And that's the ethos, and that's been what we've been trying to push as much as we can.
Will you clean the graffiti off first?
No.
Oh no.
No.
Why do
So
we do
that's
that?
going to be part of it, is it?
Try not to get
Yeah, absolutely. It's about retaining as much of that spirit as we can, and whether that's through new interventions or whether it's through reuse. And it's important to remember that although this is part of the Truman Brewery estate in terms of the ownership, where we're standing now, this isn't public. You don't come in here unless there's a specific event on. Yeah. It's actually a closed private site. As you can see, there's operations and management functions here, but we will be, counter to that, we will be standing in a truly new, vibrant public space and a series of public spaces, which is, there's not many opportunities to do this in cities like London these days, to really have that impact of turning something fundamentally private into something sort of openly public. And as we walk now back towards Dre Walk, some of those references that Ed and Jonathan were picking up on, we'll be able to see, and the other two buildings that we're going to talk about here with Morrison Company are more insertions into the live areas of the site, if you want to call it that. They're already public facing aspects of the site, and that brings some of the same considerations, doesn't it? But also some interesting new perspectives as well. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really interesting point about this space we're in, because I honestly didn't really know it was a space at all. It's completely private, it's completely walled off, and it's such a central part of the city, and it is such an incredible and rare opportunity to have a plot this large to be redeveloped, opened up to the public, and absolutely maximise what it can be. And I think that we're really excited to be part of the journey the Truman Brewery is going on to open this up and develop it for the future.
Is this sort of one of your most complex sites, or is it straightforward?
Oh no, it's definitely one of the more complex ones. Yeah, of course. As I mentioned before, it's not a standalone building. It's working with a series of other architects and design teams to bring different designs together, and how they sit together, how do they feel together, the scale of them, the interaction of them, and positioning a building where we are, adjacent to the park and on the corner of the master plan, has been a real challenge for us to find the right language, the right massing, the right form, and an overall approach of the building to really maximise what we think is a very rare and amazing opportunity.
And also, the other challenges that we've faced on this project is that Block 3 is the largest plot on the master plan site, and on a master plan site like this, there are infrastructural considerations that need to be taken into account. for example, a loading bay. Where do you get your deliveries? Where is the logistics hub? Because we happen to be the largest site, all of that stuff, all of that infrastructural stuff that makes the master plan tick goes into block 3. It's sort of placed on that corner there. But we've tried to be quite playful about it, you know. We've accepted that there is a loading bay. We've literally just walked through a loading bay here. But what we're doing is we're not shutting it off. We're actually creating these picture windows into the loading bay so that people can actually see.
For kids.
Yeah, right.
Like, you know.
So we've got a series of picture windows into the loading bay, and they're all orientated at different heights. So you've got some for adults, some for kids. So everybody can look in to see the functionality of the master plan site.
You can see now we're on Dray Walk and the vibrancy of the place, but also just how tight it is.
Yeah.
You know, you've got people walking. We've had to stop to allow this group through, but in sort of traditional urban planning terms, that would be seen as a negative thing.
Right.
But actually, it's real character full of the area and something that is worth celebrating and trying to hang on to. And so, you know, the feel of the new development, it should feel very much of Truman Brewery, but it should also feel very much of Brick Lane, Spitalfields and Bangortown.
Yeah.
And we're not trying to create a pastiche. We're not trying to sort of, you know, absolutely replicate what is already here, because this is unique. We're trying to create something equally interesting, but that feels really, really of that place. And as we move down Dray Walk towards Ellie's Yard, this is maybe a good aspect here, isn't it? Because you get to see the view all the way along. New Dray Walk, which is already consented. That's part of the Woodshire Street scheme. It's already consented. We're on Dray Walk now, and then now we're looking west back towards Ellie's Yard in the foreground, Block A. Behind that, with the Invader and the Shepherd Ferry artwork on it. And beyond to the towers of Liverpool Street and the City of London. And maybe, Ed, this is a good point to talk about Ellie's Yard.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the key views that we've been thinking about the whole time designing the Ellie's Yard building, because Dray Walk is such an amazing thoroughfare. The connection between the two parts of the master plan is really key. And at the ground floor level here, there'll be an entrance, and then the building will sit kind of just where we're looking. It sits to the north of Ellie's Yard. Currently on the site, there's this buffalo wings, there's various food stalls and so on, and where the footprint of the building goes, we're looking to be super generous with as much as we can to open that up and make that public facing, be that for food trucks, be that for events. So the yard extends into the building, so you get covered yard space and you get the current open yard space. So the building's not working against what's there, but actually enhances what's there and optimises what's there. A lot of the current uses of the yard are quite chaotic. There's toilets, there's hoardings, there's all sorts going on that's really back of house functions. And what the building enables us to do is place some of those away from the public, hide them away, be that below ground or to the periphery of the site, and then really open this up for the public. So this is a really amazing opportunity, this site, to really develop Ellie's Yard for the future and to enhance it, not just to create more of the same, but to create something that complements what's already there. And we think the internal yard space can be really amazing. It's kind of 8 meters tall space, just very simple, very large grid, concrete columns in there, and very flexible space that can be used for a whole load of different kind of public events.
So where does the data centre fit into all of this?
So the data centre's the building behind, which is really on the other side of that brick wall. So currently we couldn't walk there. You know, you'd have to go all the way around. And it takes on that building there that's been empty for about 35 years or so.
I can see the broken windows.
Yeah, so we've been in there with the client and with Tom, and we've seen the state of the building. It's because it used to be a storehouse for the brewery. They had to take off the roofs, we think, to remove some of the really large vats that we used there. That's left it without a roof for about 30 years. So inside it kind of looks like a deserted kind of forest. It's like something out of The Walking Dead in there, you know. It's very interesting, but it's meant the building structure is really battered and bruised. So although we have looked at the options for retention of that building, it's not really feasible for moving that site forwards into the future. So the building now, it takes on some of the language of the building. So at lower levels we have similar banding. We're also looking at the graffiti on the building. Can we keep some of that, reuse some of that? Can we create a building that's a canvas for more graffiti in the future? And at upper levels we're creating something that's just something that represents the city. It's something interesting as you walk around. It plays with rhythm and verticality, and there's some moments that speak to the city in kind of various slightly abstract ways that we think are quite interesting.
So what do you mean by that? Is it an artwork or an architectural design of a wall?
So at the lower levels I think it's very simple architecture that can enhance all of the street art and so on. And at upper levels we're using a very thin, very light, slightly reflective metal material, and we're playing with the rhythm and we're inserting different shapes into that so that it feels a little bit fun and interesting. And you wouldn't be quite sure if you were walking around, you wouldn't think, why is there a data center here? You wouldn't know what it was. You'd just be like, what's that interesting building that's sort of shimmering in the distance behind the master plan?
It's quite a sculptural thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a sort of brick plinth, not akin to what's there already, but on top of it, it's sort of the sculptural metal sort of object.
It's kind of rare opportunity because buildings are so much about fenestration. There's so much about the windows and the openings and the rhythm that creates. Whereas if you design a building in the absence of that, what do? You know, it could just be a blank box, but that would be really dull and uninteresting, and it wouldn't feel inspired in the way that we feel inspired by the area and doing a building in the area. So that's why we've really challenged ourselves to come up with something quite unique.
And there's highly technical work that needs to go into a data center as well.
Absolutely,
and vibrations. I mean, Tom's already mentioned we're in the middle of really fantastic sort of transportation links here. Inevitably, there's a lot of stuff happening beneath us. So, you know, you've got to get the engineering right.
Yeah. So on the data center, we're working in very, very close collaboration with Arup. They're helping on the actual technical data center side of things, so the layouts and how that all works. And our focus has really been the narrative of the building, the form of the building, the appearance of the building, and the facade of the building. And working together, I think we'll hopefully create something which is a kind of pioneering level of data center for the future for a city center site.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and then there will be, we'll wander over there in a second and we can have a look at that. But there's going to be a new connection through onto Grey Eagle Street from the yard, which at the moment, obviously, this is a closed space within the confines of the brewery, and Block A actually was a piece of land separate from the main brewery site, so outside of the kind of the brewery walls, if you want to call it that. But we're kind of inside the brewery walls now, and there's a really unique character to that we're trying to preserve, but also think about, well, can extra routes in be beneficial for the Truman site, but also for the adjacent streets, and then what does that do to this public space? Because yes, there's a building going here, roughly where these, as Ed says, these kind of sort of ad hoc food trucks and toilets and generators are. That all gets kind of formalised and replaced in a new building, which Ed can talk about. But then, how does that then address the yard? Because we're very, very aware about, you know, how fondly this space is held in a lot of people's minds. You know, historically there was a building here. We used to be a brewery building on this site as well, but that's some time ago. Most people's living memory, it's of an interesting kind of centerpiece to the experience of being on Truman. So how do we enhance that, really?
Yeah, it's a space that's very dynamic. Like right now we can see it's used for logistics. You know, there's big trucks, there's lorries, there's constant movement, there's people kind of coordinating the pedestrian flow and how that works. The yard will still serve those purposes, but with the building here, there'll be a sort of dedicated internal yard space that will always be kind of accessible. And there's a perfect example.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
Well done, Edmund.
Yeah. So let's try not to get run over as we move down here. But
it's a big challenge with this podcast. It's mostly not getting hit by a car at some point.
But this is a key example of that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is, and so that, the management of that and how that works is something that's been looked at as part of the positioning of the new building. And as Tom says, we're aware that this is a very fondly looked at yard. It serves at the weekend. You have great events here and so on. So it's really protecting that use, and we think enhancing it with the internal, very very generous internal space as well. So the two complement one another, because if you look at the yard, actually it's kind of quite broken down, quite bitty. It's evolved over time. Whereas if you take a holistic view, you could think, how can I enhance what's there? How can we improve it? How can we make certain elements of it much more efficient? How can we hide away the kind of, the dirt and the detritus and put those inside of the new building somewhere? How can the bins be serviced better? How can all of these different components come together to create a new Ellie's yard that works, hopefully, we hope, even better into the future.
So I think it's about sort of tightening up that sort of logistical question about how Ellie's yard functions. But then it's also about the character. The Ellie's yard is such a well-loved space in London. I think actually, even with the addition of the new building, it's about preserving that character. I think the feeling of the yard is going to be quite similar. It's still going to be trucks moving around, logistics, just sort of very sort of haphazard in nature.
I'd love to know, when you sit down together and sort of solve the challenges of this space, how do you want people to feel when they're here in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? What does that look like for you as designers?
It's a very challenging question.
Sure.
I suppose you don't know how things will evolve and how people will use spaces, but I hope that we'll create a building, as I say, that formalises some of the informal manner of the yard at the moment, but it allows all of that kind of informal spill and different uses of the space, people just sitting on curbs and the street sides, to all still happen, while also creating this new quite amazing internal space that can also be used for different events or to hide from the rainfall, which we know is there kind of 80% of the year in Britain. Yeah.
As we've experienced over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I think we would like people to sort of feel like these new buildings that are being provided are still very much of the area, consistent with the area, so that they don't feel alien. It's not like we're building glass blocks that are on the other side of that street there. We're working quite hard to sort of introduce architecture that is very much of the area.
You almost want the building to be there and for people to feel like, oh, okay, it's actually, this just feels like it was before, but actually I can use these other spaces, they've done this, they've done that.
Yeah, created these new connections.
Yeah, one of the key, so we just had to walk around the entire block, whereas now, as part of working on these two buildings, is we'll open up the wall right here so that we can create a desire line which goes straight through this way, kind of east-west to Commercial Street, so people will be able to get to the Truman Brewery directly this way. And also for those residential areas which are up here to the north and to the west, they'll be able to come straight into the Truman Brewery and access all of the amazing amenities on offer over there. And that's kind of key component to improving the current way the yard functions, we think.
Yeah, because we're now, as Ed says, on that little walk we've just done, we're now outside of the brewery wall as it was per se, which is this amazingly colourful, vibrant surface here. On the other side of this is Ellie's yard and those food trucks that we referred to. And then somewhere around here, Ed, isn't it, is where this new passage.
Yeah, it's just about here, and then there'll be a ramp as well, so that it's all level access for any wheelchair users. And we are totally imagining that the new part of the building at ground floor is pretty blanked off, so it can be a new canvas here for the future as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to this bridge here?
So the bridge we are planning to retain. The bridge is a really interesting piece of infrastructure, and we feel like it would be a shame to remove it. It feels very much of the space. It historically connected, obviously, these two buildings, but now does not connect them. There's like a blank wall at one end. So it's really a remaining piece of infrastructure which harks back to the past, and we're planning to retain it, so our new building will prop it up. And the juxtaposition between the new build and where it hits our building, we think is kind of really interesting, unique piece of architecture, and it feels like something worth celebrating.
It's a great piece of wayfinding, we feel. So this is Grey Eagle Street, it's pretty quiet, but a lot of people coming down from Shoreditch High Street will be coming down this road and hopefully going through the new entrance that we're opening up there. And actually this bit of infrastructure is almost a greeting from Truman Brewery. It's in the very recognisable sort of concrete and brick materiality of the brewery, and it's a sort of hello, really. So we thought it would have been a shame to demolish this bridge.
A bit like the other side of Dray Walk.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see, the brewery here has got a really long history. 350 years or so there's been a brewery on the Truman site, but actually the majority of the large buildings, so this one behind us here, the bridge, so the derelict building here, and actually the buildings on the other side, you can tell they're all out of the same brick. They were all built around the same time. We think in the 70s it was when most of the larger brewery buildings were built here. And then that adds a character to the area, as the guys were saying. Like, in urban planning terms, you would never really be able to justify doing this today, in terms of building over a street like this. But the fact that it exists is something quite interesting and of the area. And this building behind us here is one of the existing brewery buildings. That's actually a data centre already. And there's actually a couple of other data centres on site as well, hidden within the other large buildings on site. And again, I don't think if you ask many people who experienced Truman Brewery, they wouldn't know that data centres were there, and it doesn't really affect their experience. They probably wouldn't sort of react either way. And but that is the large data centre here, and then we're proposing on this site here, adjacent to the existing data centre, that there is a new building here which provides that use.
Why would we build a data centre in the middle of London? Is that the best use of this space, or is it what the client wants, therefore it's what has to happen?
No, so we definitely need data centres. Everyone knows how much they use their phone, use their devices, know how much server power is used by the cloud for storing things. We're only at the tip of the iceberg of artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles and all of those other use cases that will require a massive amount of data storage in urban areas, around urban areas. So there is definitely a needs case for that from the kind of the operator demand side in terms of the customer side. In terms of the planning position, as we mentioned already, there's a permission for a large data centre over on the facing Allen Gardens, and that doesn't really contribute a great deal to Allen Gardens. The data centre we're proposing here is smaller than that one, and is located adjacent to the other data centres. So in kind of land use terms, but also in actually a needs case, I think it's quite a strong position for that. Now, clearly, other uses for this site or for other sites may deliver different benefits, whether that's more activity, whether that's more housing, more workspace. But as part of a mixed use scheme, which this is, which is delivering a huge number of different uses, different public benefits, we see this as part of that mix, really.
So presumably this is going to be the coolest data centre in London.
Hope so. Who knows? I suppose at ground floor level, you probably won't really realise it's a data centre. It'll be covered in graffiti. It'll change over time. There'll be people going in and out. It'll look like they're doing a job of some kind that you're not sure about, and there'll be graffiti all over the building that'll be changing all the time. My answer was much worse this time.
I think if you're, I think coolness is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? If you're a 15-year-old computer science student, a tour around that would be a pretty good way to spend a Saturday.
The inside and the outside,
exactly.
Perhaps, yeah.
But in different senses, maybe not so much. But I think we see it as something really really beneficial, but look, we're not dismissing the fact that, you know, it will, in some senses, you know, not be maybe as active as other uses could be, but actually, when you look at this as a site as a whole, the success of this site, of this place, already happens with these uses, and actually, some of these so-called inactive frontages, as you can see from the artwork and the way that people kind of inhabit and take them on, can actually become something really interesting in their own right.
In some ways, this site has been inactive for a long time, and it's been almost well used in a weird sort of way through the walls becoming indoctrinated, different graffiti everywhere, Helch everywhere, and all the others. And the new building will continue that in a lot of ways. It'll be 2 stories, very similar height, and it'll be a very similar kind of canvas for people to graffiti on. Then the upper levels are where it changes and it becomes something a little bit more sculptural, a little bit more looking and thinking about the city in the background, and, you know, the upper levels of existing buildings, which are using metal of different varieties and tones and levels of reflectiveness. The fences everywhere, you know, there's all of these different contextual references that come in to the top of the building, and trying to make it something sculptural, interesting, something that you're not quite sure what it is you're seeing as you walk through the city, but it might just pique your interest. You might think, oh, it's a really interesting background, what's going on there? And it becomes this more, the upper levels are more about the medium and the city scale of the building as you walk around the brewery.
I think in terms of the character of the ground floor level, you know, this is Grey Eagle Street. I think from this street between here and Commercial, it's pretty quiet. It's a quiet residential area, and actually, I think to introduce coffee shops and sort of, you know, huge retail here would probably be the wrong move. Actually, sort of retaining the quietness of this area is actually probably
Hot
be a good
property
thing.
too.
Yeah, and you can see that, you know, maybe if we have a wander down here, you'll be able to see that change.
Yeah.
It's worth saying as well that adjacent to our site here, you've got a very large telephone exchange, which is a BT property. So this sort of urban quarter around here is quite diverse. You know, you've got the brewery buildings, you've got, as I say, the large kind of infrastructural pieces which this proposal would kind of form part of. And then, as Edmund and Jonathan were saying, we're now on Calvin Street, and as we move west along Calvin Street up towards Commercial Street, you see there's actually then some really lovely kind of quite quiet residential streets that are here that we're addressing as well. So behind me here along this is the edge of the site here, essentially this party wall. So we'll be infilling this here, which, you know, these kind of edge spaces between the pavement, which is essentially the public land, and then the private land of the site. You know, there's much better ways that we can deal with this hedge condition than is there currently, and so we think, yeah, that's an aspiration very much of the project, is to make the building feel like it stitches back in some of these street patterns.
Yeah, the pavement gets quite narrow here, so the building steps back a little bit so that we get at least 2 meters around the whole building, and it doesn't create these slightly strange spaces that are behind a chain but not really used.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're looking at on this elevation that we're looking at now, is the adjacent residential building and the rhythm of that, and also the historic residential that used to be on the site here. And we're playing with the rhythm of those windows and the scale of those windows, and creating an imprint, a sort of a texture on our building that references that in kind of different subtle ways. And we're playing with the juxtaposition of that, and also the requirements of the data center to create a kind of rich layering, rather than just something that's
Flat.
only one idea and quite flat.
So in the 19th century, this terrace would have continued to that corner. See where that sort of concrete upstand is. You know, that's pretty much the line of the old street. So really, what we're doing is we're bringing that back, reintroducing that old proportion of the street.
Yeah. So the height of the lower, the plinth as we call it, is basically the same height as these residential buildings. So that goes across and meets, and then the upper levels are set quite far back from that.
You can see that people have terraces up here, and I'm sort of half wondering will there be an extension that is publicly accessible on the top of the building, or?
I mean, unfortunately, because of the use of a data center, it's very high security. I think there's like 5 levels of security before you can get in. So although we have talked about, and we like the idea of creating public terraces or accessibility with this type of building, it's not really suitable. So those uses are all crammed into the other buildings as much as we can.
Yeah.
But the building does step back significantly, and what we're doing on those terraces is we're trying to plant them as much as we can. So they be these real biodiverse spaces. They give kind of interesting greenery as you look around. Can we get trees up there? As much planting as possible is what we're pushing for these large terraces, to make the spaces kind of interesting and feel really very vibrant and green.
So planting alongside plant, very good.
Yeah, planting and plant.
Thank you both so much for your time today and for walking us through everything you're going to impact and touch and change and improve on the Truman Brewery redevelopment site. It's been a real pleasure, and you brought the sunshine. You're the first people that we've interviewed who have brought some sunshine along with you. So thanks so much, Ed, Jonathan. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
guys.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Places podcast. For more information, visit growplaces.com and follow us at We Grow Places across all social channels. See you next time.